species of consideration because of their wide-ranging nature. The UCSC Puma project has a study where they've been collaring lions and tracking them out here since 2003 and have learned a lot about where the dens are and the communication centers are. And so one of the objectives with the trail design is to keep some parts of the property that are more remote than others, some of the deeper canyons that go off away from the population of Bonny Doon, and retain the wild nature of those, or as much as possible. The future trail system is going to make a sinuous track that goes all the way through the property from just if you continued up Empire Grade about a quarter mile, that's where the future staging area will be, which is currently going through the county review process, and there'll be a public hearing in mid-June, which will wrap up the public comment process for the public access plan. So the trail system eventually will make a route all the way through the property to Coast Dairies. Mountain lion is, just one of the charismatic megafauna. One of the species that we work hard in the Restoration Reserve to try to bring back to this habitat is marble murrelet, which is a seabird that comes into proximal to the coast, to old growth habitat, pretty much because they lay an egg on a limb that and build a little fecal ring and don't really build a nest, and so they need a limb that's like at least we use 6 inches as the minimum, but like a big platform that has a flat top that can grow moss and lichen. That's the only way to have a viable marble murrelet population, is have a whole bunch of big trees with structure like that. There are a few around here. There are a couple of there are 4 delineated potential marble murrelet stands on this property that we're currently surveying. But what we're doing in our restoration thinning is identifying that habitat and really trying to enhance it for murrelets. I only go down the rabbit hole about that because bring on public access and people having picnic lunches and increase the population probably of corvids, the garbage debauched birds that really follow recreation, and they're so smart. And they are the main threat to marble murrelets, in addition to the lack of habitat, that's left for them. Really savvy birds that watch them, they're very vulnerable, to predation. So, it's super complicated, and we end up with all of these different values and having to prioritize them, and it's kind of a struggle. Thank you.
So does that mean that you talked about how there's a working forestry area and then the restoration forestry areas? So how much of that restoration tactic gets brought into the working forestry area? Is there an overlap there, or is it pretty much that's...
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say you have mosquitoes. I don't know if you care. One of the in the Santa Cruz Mountains, there's single tree selection is the only type of timber harvesting. We don't have any clear cuts in this area, and there are regardless of this property, I would say on all managed lands in this area, the practices are pretty progressive relative to the spectrum of logging practices in redwood, and there are provisions for identifying potential marble murrelet habitat trees and retaining them and retaining screen trees around them on every property that's managed in the Santa Cruz Mountains. On this property in the working forest, we go a step further in terms of identifying wildlife trees that are basal hollows, are developing other kinds of characteristics that may be good for other species, and retaining those as well. So there's definitely a lot of overlap. And in the working forest, I could go on and on. It's hard to like sum it up. But throughout the working forest, all the watercourse and lake protection zones, we make them wider than required by the rules. So minimum of the rules is 100 feet up each side, and ours are generally 150 to 200 feet up each side. So about a 400-foot wide swath, and it throughout the working forest, wherever there's one of those watercourse zones, we use those to create late cereal habitat. So we pretty much thin from below only in the areas adjacent to watercourses, retaining about 85% canopy is the minimum that we would go to around the stream, and that's to keep cool, clean water for the anadromous fish. Both watersheds on this property, San Vicente, which we're at the top of, and Scotts Creek, which is just west of us here. This property feeds both of those watersheds, and they both have, relative to this region, thriving steelhead and coho populations. So there's a lot of overlap. But I would say in the working forest, the goal in the matrix, outside of the areas around wildlife habitat and watercourse and lake protection zones, is being able to harvest big trees long term, and so growing big trees. And so we do modeling where we carry the growth and harvest rates out over a couple hundred years, because that's the type of time frame that you have to think about when you're managing species that grow to be hundreds of years old, in the case of redwood, 1,000 years old. And we are cutting about 80% of growth over any given harvest entry. And the goal there is to perpetually recruit larger trees in the working forest. But they're definitely, there's definitely management. And so we're kind of like cycling through trees in the matrix of the working forest, but still allowing them to get at least 48 inches in diameter is, part of the crop tree size, how we make decisions on which trees to cut in the working forest.
So are you only cutting down redwoods, and how many species of trees generally are here? And do you use the profits from the cutting of the trees to fund the rest of the activities that you do here?
Right. On this property, all the revenue from timber harvest goes back into managing the property and doing the invasive species control and the road maintenance. There's a lot that we have 70 miles of road. We are decommissioning some roads, but mostly we're abandoning
70 miles.
Yes,
Wow.
Mostly abandoning roads that are hydrologically connected near streams, and armoring roads so that they're more that they're less of a potential sediment contribution. The forest types that we're going to go through as we go down through this property, right up here, like when I look at this, I really am like, man, bring the fire back. This is like a mature oak woodland, and it's been invaded by fir, and there would be, some scattered massive fir. This has had a shaded fuel break about 4 years ago. So if you look off 75 feet from the edge of this road, you see this wall of vegetation, and that's because we reduced the ladder fuels, so we cut down, the brush and small trees that were in the understory of these awesome, we're looking at madrone and canyon live oak, and we have a few shreve oak around, and tan oak, and Douglas fir. Those are the main species in the mix right here. And I would say it's way heavier to fir than it, quote, should be in its reference condition. As we go down the property, we're going to transition into redwood fir and redwood hardwood mixes. When we do timber harvesting or restoration thinning, we manage the full suite of species, usually along with the prescriptions and objectives of either management in either zone, which we should really delve into management in one zone at a time, like in more depth, and we will. We're managing, to guide the species composition and the structure. And so we're managing all the species. In the working forest, the main commercial species are redwood and fir. We will manage or send to the mill in any given working forest timber harvest about 90% redwood and 10% fir. And then I have all of these hardwoods that I'm managing just to maintain and recruit site occupancy for redwood and fir. so that we are, because if you just cut those conifers, you'd skew it away from conifer and eventually have a lot more hardwood dominance in the working forest. And so we manage hardwoods where they're influencing the growth of, redwood regeneration and redwood release. And there are some outlets for hardwood. I wish there were more. Like that tan oak right there has got some log sections in it that would make hardwood flooring. And so any section that's straight, 8 feet long and 20 inches inside the bark on the small end, I can send to out of the woods, and they'll quarter saw it and make tan oak flooring, which is totally awesome, and like a renewable local resource. And it's also gorgeous. It's got really white parts like birch and dark like walnut and crazy like swirls like bird's eye maple.
Are there local mills that are handling that?
Well, Out of the Woods is a local bandsaw operator,
Okay.
and like that's California Hardwood is his website, and like I give him as much material as I possibly can. It's value added, The rest of our hardwood that doesn't meet those criteria pretty much goes to firewood.
Madrone? There's no market for Madrone?
Well, there is a little bit in a similar form.
Yeah.
Madrone, they make wainscoting. Yes, Madrone also. We cut a little bit less. There's a lot of Madrone right here. We cut a little bit less Madrone than we do tan oak, so it's not top of my mind. But Madrone also.
It's such a gorgeous wood.
Absolutely. And the way that these hardwoods get kind of treated, they're dried really slowly, and then they're kiln dried, and they're quarter sawed. I don't know if if you've got a log like this. First they cut it in quarters. There's a lot of waste with that, because you have all these wood, like little, you have these triangular sides that you need to slough off. But the reason they do that is because then it doesn't work. Then the way the cut goes on the quarter sawn piece keeps it stable, and so makes nice quality products that last, that people want.
That's that beautiful, clear, straight grain that's really stable.